What is the inner Earth? My first, introduction to any of the inner Earth information was on the smart glass pad. And for those of you who don't watch the show, it was a plexiglass-like pad that if you found it on the ground, you would think it was unremarkable. But there was a bioneural interface component that worked with it, where it would show you what you wanted by thinking it, and would show you in your language, and you would get three-dimensional displays off of it. It was like a dumb terminal that connected to a database of all of this information. And we had two different databases. One of them was one that was owned by a non-terrestrial group that we're working with. I'm not exactly sure which group it was. I'm fairly certain it was the Nordics. And then we have the database that you connect to that is just the military information, nothing off-world, other than what we've gleaned on our own. So a lot of the time I spent on the research vessel, it was quite boring. I was either wiping down the walls, setting up or breaking down modular rooms for different experiments. So we would get a lot of time to look at these smart glass pads, and for some reason the inner Earth stuff got my attention. I really liked it. And there was a decent amount of information, but it was only probably in the late 70s that some of these beings that were connecting to military types, they were saying they were from a different star system, and it turned out that many of them came from below the Earth, and they were just telling us that for operational security, so we wouldn't, come down and ruin the good thing they have going. And as it states, we had access to a lot of very high-tech data. I was not super scientific minded, so I stuck to the outline information more than I did the actual scientific papers, which I would tend to get lost in. There are major cavern networks all around the Earth. A lot of these have to do with the creation of geothermal activity, like lava tunnels. Some of them are quite large. Others come from rift systems that have been exploited by non-terrestrials many thousands of years ago, and they had connected rift systems with tunnels that they created. And this was the ancient builder race that disappeared, and since then different non-terrestrial groups, inner Earth groups, and military groups have been exploiting the same underground waterways, and some areas the size of Texas that are open underground. Some of them are so large that condensation builds up, they have rain, they have misty type clouds. The art that I've had depicted, you cannot recreate the feeling of when you walk into a giant cavern and look around, and there's no way that you can really depict the size of these caverns. Amazing. Most of the cavern network that are used by non-terrestrials and humans alike are at the most usually about 40 miles deep or less, within 20 to 40 miles. Interestingly enough, there is some sort of UN law, just like if you go out in the middle of the ocean, you're in international territory where certain laws don't apply. They've written laws like that for space, but also if you go a certain depth in the Earth, after you get in a certain miles deep, you're in international territory. You're not, if you went directly below somewhere in Texas, I can't remember how many miles it is, but once you get to a certain point, you're not considered to be in America anymore, and American laws do not apply. That's why they do a lot of their unacknowledged, as Stephen Greer has said, programs is another way of saying illegal. they're not legal. So people that are bound to keep secrets in unacknowledged programs, these are illegal programs, and they shouldn't be held accountable for leaking that information, in my opinion. Interestingly enough, it turns out that humans on the surface have sought refuge in the inner earth many times in our history. Some of the documentation that I saw on the smart glass pad and imagery that was shown were sort of ancient Aztec looking structures that had been abandoned long ago, that were inside these caverns, not super deep, fairly close to the surface, where it was obvious that thousands of people had lived there for a protracted amount of time, most likely to allow the surface to return to normal. And what I later found out was that different inner Earth groups, different non-terrestrial groups, were rescuing groups of people on the surface and bringing them under. And it was part of this this grand genetic experiment. There were over 22 different genetic experiments going on the planet. So they are protecting their experiment, their investment. It's kind of like doing an emergency backup so that they don't have to start over again. They found a lot of interesting life below ground. Most of it's been, a lot of it's been reported, but there are some that it would seem like a sci-fi movie. Giant, not exactly mushroom looking, but fungus that give off blue light. Some of them give off like an orange light, green light. There are all these different types of plant-like and fungus-like life forms down there that actually give off light. They'll break down dead material, or some of them actually break down the walls and themselves and pull minerals out of the cave walls. Now, what was really interesting in some of the imagery, there were huge cavern areas where it looked almost like a greenish sky. But what it turns out is that all along the ceiling was this lichen-type matted material that was absorbing the rock, it turning as a waste material, putting out bioluminescent light. And it wasn't enough to where you could see super well, but it was almost like wearing a pair of the goggles that the military used for starlight amplification. Of course, we're going to find all the things that slither and crawl down there, and most of them are either blind or have zero pigment in them at all, which I don't think is very surprising. Yeah, the salamanders look really nasty, don't they? So we have, a lot of different types of life, plant life, that is very interesting. But of course, then we start moving up to things that think and eat and breathe the way we do. On Cosmic Disclosure, I talked about this first being that they would see a lot. They had red reflective eyes, large eyes, very pale, human. They're obviously a human group that had come down during one of these cataclysms and never left, and then started to adapt. Supposedly they're very stealthy. You're very rarely going to see one. You might hear them, and if you catch them with your light, you're going to catch a very large pink-red iris on them. But for the most part, they're hard to catch. Unfortunately, when the military expeditions, when they would go down, they would want a closer look at a specimen. They would terminate it and then get a closer look. And unfortunately, the ones that I saw had been shot and were being videoed as they were being pointed at, and the ribs, and they were showing, unemotionally just showing the being they just shot. There are tall black reptiloids that control different areas below ground, and they seem to have their own agenda. A lot of them have mainly been seen in the Middle East and northern Africa type areas underground. Now, there was a comic book that came out a long time ago. It was, can't remember the name of it now. They were talking about these very elephant-looking inner Earth beings they called the Darrow, that were very aggressive, very negative toward human beings. And I had actually seen information about them while I was in the programs. I happened to be 2 years ago at the Conscious Life Expo, before I had become public at all. I went and saw Jupiter Ascending with David Wilcock. And we're sitting in the chairs, and this being pops up, and it looks so similar to the imagery I'd seen. I was like, I slightly was like, whoa. But if you see David tell a story, it's like I had a mild seizure next to him or something. He likes to over-animate everything. But yeah, that movie had some interesting disclosure in it from a very dark perspective. So what is the Hollow Earth? This is a story that's been around for a long time. It's not new by any means. What was often believed was that we had a center sun. The inside of the crust was hollow, and on the inside there were just people, sailing around and living just mirror to us on the other side. Well, it turns out that there are large enough areas to where I could see where people could get that idea, that they think it's just one giant empty area, but it's a honeycomb. It's the honeycomb Earth. From centrifugal forces, heating and cooling, the convection of the Earth, over time, it's created this entire zone that are porous, like a honeycomb, and a lot of them connect with each other through rift systems, which I mentioned earlier. And ancient aliens have carved out those areas and made them to where you can transnavigate the planet. So there are underground lakes, oceans, rivers, and a vast amount of water that is locked up in in rocks that is crystallized. And recently, it's been scientifically announced that locked up in the rocks below ground is way more water than we have in our oceans. There's plenty of water down there, and a lot of it is very mineral rich, as you would imagine. These underground rivers it's pretty amazing how we have submarines that are navigating these underground rivers. Could you imagine being the Lewis and Clark that discovered and mapped out those areas? I'm sure there's plenty of information about people lost, some harrowing experiences doing that. The legend of Agartha, it really became popular during the 1930s and 40s. The Germans loved it, I guess that area of Europe. And they didn't think of it as a fanciful story. They believed it to be fact. These subterranean civilizations were called the Agartha Network. And many times, as I mentioned earlier, these subterranean groups, they would come up and masquerade as gods or angels. And as we became more sophisticated, they had to change, their story had to be more sophisticated. Then they began to tell us that they came from different star systems. There are definitely other beings from different star systems that look very similar to them that are visiting us. So a lot of people think that I'm trying to say, well, people from Andromeda or this are lying. we just know that they were lying to humanity about where they were from, because they were worried that if we found out where they were, we would come down and invade, which I can't disagree with. And of course, the Agarthan UFOs, they're called the Silver Fleet, which is interesting. One of the groups that I met that were associated with the Anshar, they have a fleet that they call the Silver Fleet. I don't know if it's the same or not. Admiral Byrd he's been a character that has been brought up all throughout the Inner Earth type of stories, and also anything that had to do with, the Germans being down in Antarctica setting up bases. So you can't really talk about the subject without bringing up Admiral Byrd. A diary came out at one point, and there's a lot of controversy on whether it's true or not. You have people that are ready to do battle with you either way. So I do know that in the programs that they stated that that part of his information was not accurate, that he had an actual diary that talked about that should come out someday, and after full disclosure, that talked about moment to moment everything that occurred on this trip down during Operation High Jump. But according to, and it's interesting that in recent excavations, I'm getting ahead of myself, that they're finding prehistoric animals down in Antarctica. Because in this book, he is stating that they started to see mastodon and woolly mammoth type beings. So there has to be some sort of truth or information seated in this diary that is giving us some information that we should pay attention to, at least. And of course, the diary claimed that Admiral Byrd was flying over Antarctica and was, I guess, flown in. Next to him, he was given a escort flight by a UFO. They landed him in a green area, free of ice, and he was then introduced to these tall, blonde, Nordic-looking beings that had Germanic-type accents. And he visited with them a while. They talked about how warlike we are, which that seems to be the common theme with every group that's talking to us. And then he was escorted back to meet up with his fleet. I guess everyone's heard about the Nazis, and they were obsessed with the ancient information and how it could tie in to them and their conquest. They were going all through the Himalayas, going to these monasteries that hadn't seen another human being other than the people watching it in hundreds of years, went in with their machine guns and looted the places, and came out with some very interesting scrolls that looked exactly like a schematic for making spacecraft. So that they got a major head start with some of the information that they located. Now, while they were there, they found out that, and they were interrogating these priests and monks, they found out that these monks were claiming to be in contact with an inner Earth group, and that they were protecting their secrets, and it seems that finally the Germans were able to, through these people, meet these inner Earth groups that very well, a lot of people think they're the inner Earth groups, but I'm pretty certain that it's this Nordic group, this ET Nordic group that's been trying to work against the reptilians for millennia for not necessarily control of the Earth, but to try to help us fight back. this is when the Germans really started to meet with this Inner Earth group, or this Agarthan group. It was right around the same time that they also started to meet with the reptilians. And the reptilians were happier to give them more militaristic type of information and provide a place for them in Antarctica to move as the war winded down. The reptilians invited the Nazis into an area that was once an ancient civilization. The Germans moved right in. They were cataloging the information that they were finding, but they were just mainly worried about setting up a submarine military base very quickly for the fleeing elite of Germany. This is the Mayan group. This is really the first group I really ended up getting introduced to. They fly in large cylindrical vessels that were pretty much carved out of the inside of a mountain or deep in the earth and teleported out into space. So if you were in one walking around, it does not look that technological. You see stone walls, you feel like you're in a cave. And then every once in a while you'll see something strange, like something floating off the ground, kind of slowly turning, that has symbols on it that obviously looks technological. Back before I really started talking to David about all of this, and all of this came out, I had recently had a detached retina, and I was having surgeries from it. And after one of the surgeries, I all of a sudden started recalling a lot of the real negative things I was forced to do, a lot of really bad stuff that a lot of us were forced to do over that 20 years. And I was just about suicidal. I was in bad shape. My wife was extremely worried about me. And then one night in my house, a human being pops in along with a bunch of these Mayan-looking people. And it was the first time that I met Lieutenant Commander Gonzalez. He was with them, and he was just giving me instructions because they wouldn't talk or interface with me. They brought me up to this ship and put a halo device on my head, and they used their technology, their healing technology, to help me, I guess, not really forget, but file away some of those memories. They told me there was no positive reason for me to have access to them at this point. And a lot of the other memories, somehow they removed the emotional charge associated with them. So I could have the memory and not have the flow of emotions that were associated with it. This helped me quite a bit. If they hadn't done that, I never would have gotten to the point to where I would have been able to, talk so openly about this information. Most recently, they've been doing a lot of further help with me. It turns out that all of the blank slating that they had done to me, the experience in time in these high magnetic fields that these torsion field drives have on our craft, they're not good for your neurology at all over long periods of time. So a lot of people, when they come out, they start having weird purple tunnel type neurological issues all over, memory issues. And I've been having a lot of those issues, and they've been helping me what little they can, because a lot of it has to do with if they don't want to, I guess, reactivate memories and emotions that they helped help me with earlier. So I'm going through that with them, and Gonzalez uses this, looks like a black cue ball. He walks up and he just scans my forehead and will scan me up and down with it. It just looks like a stone. It's hard to imagine how it could be technological. And then I finally had my meeting with the Inner Earth people. It was it was just a story I had read on the smart glass pad. And other than, I really didn't know what had happened with the Mayan group. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know they were an inner Earth group. So my first experience was meeting Kari here. She's they put in their inner Earth virgin priestess. She's a inner Earth priestess who I guess happens to be a virgin. She's over 130 years old. When I interfaced with her, I was able to glean that. And her people, they live much, much longer than that, over 1,000 years. The first time I met, they actually teleported me down there with really no warning. Since then, they started using this ability they have. It's kind of like it's kind of like teleconferencing, but it's all occurring telepathically. And you would appear in this area that David Wilcock dubbed the construct, I guess, from the Matrix. It's the area that's all white, and we'll sit at a table and meet, or have a quick meeting, and then it's over. So sometimes I'm teleported down there, but most often recently it's meetings in what we're calling the construct. I met 7 different groups when I was down the first time, and the fact that these 7 groups were coming together was unprecedented. They don't normally associate or work together, but a lot had been going on with people from Earth using new scalar type of weapons and striking deep in the Earth to try to get to them. And they were having some issues with some non-human groups that they do battle with from time to time, that things were starting to get hot for them. So they were meeting as sort of an emergency kind of meeting. And the Anshar group had a Saturn symbol that they wore. And depending which group they were, they had a different stone in each area of the amulet. There were some that looked very much like this, that had dark hair. And a completely different group that most of them they had blonde hair or sandy brown hair. And then the third group that Kari came from, that they were almost albino, completely white hair, and they had blue eyes, and they were all very pale. And their eyes are just barely larger than us. Every once in a while you see a person that has just very large eyes and they get your attention, I mean, it's only that mild of a difference. This group here, a lot of, since I've announced them and talked about them, a lot of people have had negative energy feelings from them. This group is mostly based, believe it or not, on Venus. And they have enclaves here on Earth as well, but they're sort of militaristic, and they're very serious about guarding the treasures on Venus. So that's what they do. But the other inner Earth groups seem to also, I wouldn't say didn't like them, but they didn't really seem to trust them. Kind of kept an eye on them. And then we had a very Asian-looking group. Now, a lot of people, they've seen on the internet this mission that supposedly happened, where they went to the moon, found a craft, and found beings in stasis inside of them. And one of them they dubbed the Mona Lisa. She had a bump here on her forehead, and a lot of people are thinking that they could be from the same group. And I don't know, she'd been in space and in stasis, if that was real, for a long time. They look a little bit different than that. They had a very strong Asian look to them. And there was another group that had, kind of like how under your skin you see your vein, the blue vein. All of their skin was that exact same color. And they had more of a kind of a look from like they were from India or that area. They were all speaking back and forth what I was told was a pre-Akkadian language, very strange, different sounding than what you would hear if you were a linguist. It would stand out very much. And there was an African-looking group that had a very strong, loving presence about them. It was, I mean, you could really feel it. David was surprised when I told him about this because there are a lot of aspects of the people in the secret space program that are prejudiced. They have, I guess, issues, and they were trying to convince David that outside of the planet that there are no African-looking people, which is absolutely wrong. And this is the Anshar group that I've gotten to know the best. Here's the blonde-looking ones. Same amulet. This is the group here that they had a space fleet, or a fleet of spacecraft that are very formidable, that they call the Silver Fleet. And I have no idea if they are associated with the other groups that have a Silver Fleet. The Raptors are a group that seemed to be a holdover, or I guess when the dinosaurs had been removed from the planet for this mammalian experiment, some of them had been pulled underground to be kept safe. They're a remnant of the dinosaurs. They're proto-warm-blooded, and they look and move more like a bird than you would think of a reptile or a dinosaur. Real jerky, quick movements. Very fast. They're very fast. And most of them have some sort of feathers on them, like a plume, that are colorful. Some people think that this could be behind some of the Quetzalcoatl kind of feathered serpent stories from the Mayans. Could be. I'm not sure about that myself, but they do inhabit a lot of Central and South America. They've taken over a lot of areas, including some crystal caverns that these inner Earth groups used to use as libraries, and they lost access. And here's the ones we love to hate, the reptilians. People know more about them than just about any other race. But there are a lot of different types of reptilian types of beings. Some of them are rather short, like 3.5, 4 feet tall. They have a head shaped like the guy there on the right. That's kind of a gray alien kind of look. They kind of look like gray aliens. And a lot of people that have been abducted by them or have had experiences with them have thought that they were picked up by the Greys when it was actually this group. And of course, we have the tall, white reptilians that are the royalty. These beings they're incredibly telepathic. Like, I've interfaced with a number of different types of beings, but nothing that, and I hate to use the word, but it almost seemed like rape. They grab your mind, they force you to experience what they want you to experience, and it's a humiliating experience, and it drains you. A lot of these other beings, they are very give and take in their communications with you, and don't just, take you over. A lot of these reptilian groups, they run joint bases with modern humans, and we've been working alongside with them for the the Americans, at least since the 50s, when after Operation Paperclip allowed the Germans to infiltrate the military-industrial complex and pretty much take it over. So, as a part of the inner Earth, I guess we're a part of the inner Earth now. We're setting up deep underground military bases all over the planet, under the ocean, very deep, and we're competing for territory with some of these older groups. A lot of the reason why they've been stating that they're putting all these bases in the ground is for continuity of government, which is a little ridiculous. That's the same reason that they have built these different bases on Mars. They state that they built these for continuity of species instead of continuity of government. If Earth was wiped out, they would have a genetic stock of humans to draw from. As I stated, all these unacknowledged projects go on. Human cloning. Cloning has been going on for a long time. We supposedly didn't discover genetics until, was it 56, around that range? Well, we were working with non-terrestrials doing genetic experiments in the 30s and 40s. So this has been going on quite a bit longer than most of us would think, the genetic part and our involvement in it. We, of course, reverse engineer technology and do a lot of research and development. And they try to keep it below the area where they would be held accountable legally for what they do to a lot of the human guinea pigs. Everyone has probably seen this map. And what's interesting is that these maglev trains, they do run all over the planet, but there is a much older maglev train system that is non-terrestrial. It is larger, and we've accidentally cut into it, drilling holes a few times. And, they run us out and tell us, don't come back. But there is a much, much larger underground tunnel network that the non-terrestrials use. Recently, I received a report that I wasn't sure about, but David Wilcock talked to Pete Peterson, one of his insiders, and he seemed to back it up. After the election, a lot of these bases, FEMA-type bases, were supposed to be turned over and to the next administration's leadership. A lot of these people refused to do so. They locked the doors and said they weren't coming out. So we sent in Marines. The Marines went down and took forever to break through all of the concrete, the rebar, this reinforced steel. And they were told, once they broke through, to give everyone in the base one opportunity to surrender. If they refused to surrender or responded violently, they were ordered to wipe out all inhabitants, to wipe out everybody. Unfortunately, they did not completely brief a lot of these Marines that they might run into non-terrestrial beings. So a lot of these guys, they were really freaking out. They had a lot of problems because they went in, it was bad enough that they were having to kill all these humans, but now they were face to face with 8-foot-tall devils. And they were doing battle with them. Of course, we eventually, took the bases, but these soldiers, I've heard, they did not take it well, and they have not been recovering well from it. Talk about some of my lab experiences, and as I stated before, my labs, it stands for military abduction, and we're learning more and more about the programs. Everybody wants to lump them under MK Ultra or this or that. There are so many different types of programs that we really need to come up with a different term. My lab just doesn't seem to be accurate anymore. Once I was identified as an intuitive empath and brought into the MyLab program, when I was at school, they started picking me up in a white van and driving me for almost an hour to Fort Worth, to Carswell Air Force Base. Yeah, that base has a lot of history going back to even Roswell. And of course, I would be taken with other kids. We would meet them. We would drive onto the base into a kind of a carpool area that was a hangar for just cars. We would get out, walk down a hall a little ways, and then take a large elevator deep into the ground, where we would come out and there would be more hallways with a guy in front of the intersection of the hallways and the elevator at a little card table that was checking IDs and making sure you were supposed to be there. Yeah, they had, and it didn't turn out that the base, the wing commander knew what was going on. I ended up talking to someone that served closely with him, and they didn't believe me, and then I described the base where I was driven, and they were shocked. The tunnels that I went to, they had been in them. They said they were they were built during the Cold War era, and they were shocked. At this point, this is when they started to acclimate us to extraterrestrials, and we're trying to deprogram this natural fight or flight response we have. And I haven't really seen that it can be totally deprogrammed. I mean, right now, if I'm not expecting a reptilian or one of these other beings to appear here, if one appears, I get overcome with a fight or flight response, and just about everyone does, especially if they don't look like what we would consider benevolent. We have a visceral reaction. They were trying to program that out of people as much as possible, and us as children especially. So they would put us in situations in the beginning to where they would give us virtual reality scenarios and then start introducing non-humans through that way, or we would come out of being under that type of technology. And when we went into the remote viewing session, or the augmented reality session, there would be like 3 or 4 guys sitting at a table, and then we would come out, and as they were unhooking us, you'd be looking around, and all of a sudden there would be a gray alien sitting at the table. And no one would say anything about it. They would just, get you all unhooked, and then you would walk out. And they started to acclimate us like that. Now, with this technology, it was virtual reality, but they were sending things to you bioneurally. There's a place in your back where all the nerves cross, kind of like where the 2 little dents are in your back. And they have these 2 nodes that stick out. You lay against it, and they stick against your back, and it will send data to and from your nervous system through those areas. So they could also, kind of like, I guess, in The Matrix, give you a college education or teach you about a certain technology very quickly using this technology, as well as use it to train you and profile you to see how you will react under different circumstances. They use a lot of trauma-based testing in those scenarios, a lot of times just to see how we would react, how much better of a personality profile they could draw up for us to use that information to know how to use us in the future. At one point, we were taken to a crystal cavern. We were first taken underground on the tram system to a location to where there were a number of submarines sitting in a cavern-looking area. And they looked like regular submarines to me of the era. And this would have been probably between 81 and 83. I was 11 to 13 years old. So they loaded us all in these different subs and took us down. And where we ended up at the time was miraculous. Since then, discovered similar looking caves. This one in Mexico, where these are huge crystals that have formed over millions of years. That it was about 140 degrees where we went, and they had us hooked up to instruments that monitored our health for several different reasons, as well as they had cameras. They had all types of different equipment in the room that were doing some sort of, they were measuring, trying to measure something, like electrically. And I told the story on Cosmic Disclosure about how they wanted us to try to interface or psychically connect with the crystals, that they warned us not to physically touch the crystals because the crystals could harm us or we could harm the crystals, that we were just to reach out to them. And when I did so, I started to see this pink kind of aura around the crystal, and I got a download. I really couldn't, it was just too much information for me to try to do a little stop in time to look at the picture. But when we were recently going over this information for the graphic novel, I remembered kind of off, not really in the middle of all of this, but kind of back, was a very tall being in a similar suit we were in. I could just see this part of their eyes, but between the top of their lip and their forehead. And they had very large, pale blue eyes, and their skin was alabaster white. Interesting. I think some of the work that I'm doing with Gonzalez with my memory and trying to fix some of the neurological issues, I'm starting to trigger information that for some reason they didn't want me to have. It was beautiful. They were beautiful. And, we were told that these crystals they had a life force to them. And basically when we interfaced with them, we connected with them and were downloading information like a USB drive. And later the information was, I guess, downloaded out of us. Of course, as protocol, at the end, we were all debriefed as a part of them also removing the data from us, and then we were blank slated and sent back up to the surface, where we soon got into a white van, were driven to school, and then our parents picked us up. And we were usually given a memory of going on a field trip to a museum or to see a show or something like that. The screen memories seem to fade away very quickly for me, and about 3 to 5% of the people. For some reason, about 3 to 5% of the people they use these technologies on, they're just unsuccessful, at least for very long. The way I've explained it is that, how do we have memories from past lives? Our physical brains were not there to record the information. Well, obviously, we have since I was in the IT field, we have a physical hard drive and we have a virtual hard drive. And everything we experience now and in other lives are backed up to that virtual hard drive. This physical hard drive can be messed with. It can be reformatted, it can be reprogrammed, but the information that is up in the cloud, I guess you would say, can't be. And if they remove information from your physical hard drive, there seems, with 3 to 5% of the intuitive empaths, there seems to be a automatic download or type of thing that occurs where the information starts coming back and they're unable to erase the information permanently. This is the first time I went down to the Anshar area down in the inner earth. I was brought down. There was a bright flash. I wasn't expecting it. I was laying down, and all of a sudden I find myself, I'm laying down on a floor in a completely different environment. All of a sudden it's cooler. I can smell and kind of taste minerals. I hear kind of echoey type of sounds. I was not where I was when I went to sleep. and I was in the middle of this room, and I saw people guarding doorways, kind of off in the distance. And at that point, Ari Gonzalez and a small delegation approached me, and I was still pretty nervous. They then brought me to this cleansing room, which was close by, and it was because we were on holy ground, I guess you would say. We had to remove the clothing we were wearing and cleanse ourselves in this pool. And for them, it was not that big of a deal. But I was probably about 60 pounds heavier, and all these people looked like vegans. So first off, I wasn't real excited about taking my clothes off. And Gonzalez wasn't making it any easier. I was kind of trying to hide the best I could, and Hari comes walking up with towels and the tunic thing that I was supposed to wear, the robe. And as she was walking up, I was kind of using him in between us to block. And he saw what I was doing, and he got a real devious smile on his face, and he took one giant step back. So she gave me the robe and the little towels and left, or stepped back away, and then I was guided through doing the embarrassing cleansing ceremony. Once I had the robe on and I kind of shrugged off that experience, we headed towards the actual meeting. And I didn't even know that it was really going to be this big of a meeting, but this unprecedented meeting between the 7 different groups. And above the doorway in the main room, they had Vesica Pisces symbols above each doorway. And the little hole in the middle, it looked like you could stick a dowel piece of wood in there. It looked like it held something. One of the symbols I saw a few times was there was a large gold star, and next to it a smaller red star, both of them with 8 points. And it ended up being on the main table when I walked in for this meeting. And they had this is very accurate, by the way, the placement of it all. And this is when they started really speaking this pre-Akkadian language. And that's when they started also discussing what a threat our scalar weaponry had become to them, and how we were basically seeing all these underground bases weren't doing the intelligence to find out whose they were, and when we were attacking them, we weren't distinguishing between them. We were just, oh, there's one, hit it. And it was causing them a lot of problems. When I was taken to see the city, that's when I was blown away. I walk out of this area, and it's like when you walk up to a building for the first time and you find yourself looking straight up. It's the perspective is so quickly changed on you. It was like being on a different planet. There were some of these natural pillars that were in between the ceiling and the floor. And remember how big these pillars would have to be. You could fit Texas inside of this cavern. And there were lights, windows and lights, and looked like balconies all up and down this giant pillar. There were all of these craft that were flying around overhead as well, and they were just disappearing into the side of a wall as if they were just dematerializing and passing straight through. And they had egg-shaped craft, cigar-shaped craft, and irregular flying saucer type craft that were flying, and it looked like kind of like a highway. What was interesting were the giant buildings that just like domes of light. I didn't get close enough to see what they were, but they were very large, about the size of like a football stadium. They were very large. later I got to see this very similar type of scene. I was flown in one of the egg-shaped craft over the city and through the wall on a recent expedition. Well, you know, what do the Anshar eat? They're definitely not carnivores. They very much into eating vegetables and fruit that are grown in a certain way, a very high vibratory way. It's interesting how important that is to them, having high vibratory food. When Thierry told me that that was a very important part of this journey that most of us leave off. We'll work on the, you know, somewhat on the physical part, but we'll work on the spiritual part. We don't realize that we hit a glass ceiling until we can get our physical bodies on the right vibration for what we're putting in it. This was a huge area. I mean, these crops were enough. I mean, they could feed millions of people. We were taken again to this other area that was kind of a park, and it had all sorts of animals in there from a prehistoric era, an area that I believe it was before the last cataclysm or the last ice age. There, you could hear the animals in the background. At one point, when we were close to being done, some sort of a loud cat or lion type creature roared. I could feel it in my chest. It startled me at least. And in the middle of that room was a giant obelisk that was very weathered. It looked very ancient. And directly above it, towards the top of the cavern, was this giant plasma ball that was putting off the full spectrum of light that our sun does. And during this time when I had just delivered this information, and David Wilcock got that real shocked look on his face I've seen a million times now, and dug around and pulled out a file and then displayed it to all of us at Cosmic Disclosure. And it was his current book cover. The Saturn in the background, a giant glass obelisk with the sun above it, a plasma ball above it. It was a really weird correlation. My trip there ended with me being brought to the libraries. When I arrived there, completely different look. Everything, all the stone was white and polished marble. And when I first arrived, there was a large, skinny gold arm sticking out of the ceiling holding a crystal ball. And when I told David this, he remembered a story about a pyramid that was found in Bimini underwater, and there was a hand holding a crystal, and the guy pried it out. I guess that reminded him of that story. Now, when we walked through the library, we would see these very old rolled up scrolls. We were seeing tablets and different weird looking books that were bound by like plant material and leather, all the way up to the end where I was seeing books that you could have ordered off of Amazon.com a week before. They had the ISBN numbers on them. It was amazing. So they keep abreast of all of everything. They had full access to the internet. It was down there that Ari was telling me that there's a lot of information that has been out there, and a lot of it about the Anunnaki and all of that is fairly accurate, but that the information very early on had been co-opted by this, Illuminati type faction that wanted to make their religion our religion, so they tried to skew some of the information. Apparently, to these raptor type beings, they had lost access to one of their crystal caverns that had a lot of information that was very important to them, and they wanted access to that information. And Kari had heard that as a adolescent, I had been brought down there to interface with the crystals. that was one of the big reasons they wanted to interface with me, is to try to see what kind of information they were able to glean. They had one of these old crystals, and they had it in this chamber that they were trying to regrow it somehow. Kari she had told me that she wanted to experience the memory I had of connecting with the crystals. I was kind of leery about it. I didn't know who she was. She was wanting to do something that is very personal. And she could tell I had trepidation, and she walked over to a wall, turned around, and then she had this drink that she called the elixir of Isis that would calm me down and put me in a state to where I could communicate with her better, and I turned it down. At that point, we sat down and leaned across each other and had our elbows on our knees and held hands. And at that moment, I felt as though I was pulled outside of my body towards the middle of where we were, and there was some sort of, I don't know, it's like a whirlwind going on, and I started seeing all these flashes of her life. And as she was going through my life, trying to get to the point to where she could experience that experience, I was seeing those time periods in her life too. But a lot of what I was seeing, I wasn't able to interpret because I have such a different experience than she does. But there was an experience to where she was upset extremely that one of her childhood friends had been killed in an incursion with these raptor type beings. There were a few things like that, and that's when I was able to glean from her that she is a priestess set aside to be holy, that she has never engaged in sex or any of that. She was totally put aside just for what she was doing. And after I had that experience with her, my wife would walk in for months, and I would just be sitting there staring at the wall, thinking about all of the conversations we've had. And very little of the conversation that we had in the library and the information we exchanged in this mind meld have I really recorded. I'm still processing a lot of it, and I hope to get it out at some point. But it affected me profoundly. After that, it was very soon after that, I found myself having to get on the high vibratory diet. I was eating corn dogs. I was 268 pounds. And I guess people that saw the show, you saw how quickly this transformation happened. It was almost bizarre. People at Gaia, when I would show up each time, I was so much different. They had problems processing it. A lot of people out in the community are convinced that I've been replaced by a clone. A skinnier clone, yeah. Now the Anshar, they let me know that for millennia, they have been reaching out and interfacing with human beings and helping them channel information that is spiritually enlightening and also information that is scientific, that will help us through certain periods. When I walked through this library area where all these people were kicked back in these egg-shaped chairs, it was, I don't know, it's surreal. You're walking, and you see all these people kicked back, kind of like in meditation mode. A lot of people would love to see that here. But that's when it was explained to me that they reach out, they'll reach out, and a person usually will tell them who they're going to be in the session. Like a person will be there, and they'll come to them, and they'll be like, "Oh, are you blah, 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 blah," from their belief system. And usually they'll be like, "Okay, it's a positive figure. Sure, we'll roll with it." And then they start giving this positive spiritual information or technical information. And not just this group are reaching out. We're in telepathic communication with a lot of different beings, and a lot of them are these like archangel and beings that are in another realm, not physically with us. The Inshore brought me on 2 different occasions down to Antarctica. The first time was just for what they called a reconnaissance flight. They wanted to get this information to the SSP Alliance and a few other people, and so they pretty much just brought me along for the ride. This is the vessel we were on. Gonzalez called it a bus because I guess when you walk in, it's seated very similar to a bus, and it looks kind of like a bus. So he was calling it the Inshore bus. Now, one of the interesting things I was shown is that directly below Antarctica, there is a huge kind of a cavern system that goes in under the water, and then it runs into the rift system that runs under the Ross ice shelf, and runs up under the ocean in a rift system that runs all the way up to North America. The military-industrial complex have been exploiting those areas for many, many years. We've developed these giant black submarines that are electromagnetically propulsed, but they're the size of container ships. They're huge. They actually load with, I saw them unloading, but they will load with cranes, giant container ships, just like you will see in any harbor around here. And then they take them under the ground in the water down to various places in South America and ultimately Antarctica. And a lot of the area they travel through are areas that were, I guess, created between rift systems by the ancient builder race. They're very ancient underwater tunnel systems. As we were flown in, once I really realized that there was an industrial area under the ice, I learned that they told me not to get lost in the telemetry or the information, because the craft we were on was very intuitive. If I would wonder about something, all of a sudden all this data would come up about it. And the experience was happening so quickly, if I would look at the data, I would miss a whole lot of other. So she was telling me the data is being captured, it will be sent to the proper people. Just focus on looking out the window, basically. It wasn't a window, but. And one of the things we saw was a giant, in the middle of this sprawling industrial area, obviously built by humans. They had a huge power plant that was, it created power from geothermal. It went into the ground, and the geothermal heat allowed them to create steam, which works a lot like like nuclear power here that we use. There were large buildings and structures. Like I said, mostly what was above ground there looked like a military type base and industrial, like they were building something and excavating something. I wasn't quite sure. A lot of the steam plumes were coming up from pools of water. The water was so hot that it was steaming that was coming out. And come to find out, that's what's creating a lot of these ice caverns, is the geothermal heat coming up. And it's increasing. The geothermal heat is getting more and more active down there. It's raising the entire temperature of the ice shelf by like 1 degree every couple years, which is enough to cause a massive melt at some time in the future if it keeps occurring at that rate. The excavation that we're doing underneath the ice is further destabilizing the ice. And it's a problem right now. It could cause some serious issues if a giant shelf broke off and fell in the water. It could cause tsunamis. And they're doing most of their excavating with steam, pressurized steam, to clear out areas where they are finding ancient palm trees, ancient structures, mastodons, woolly mammoth type creatures. They're finding them everywhere. They were flash frozen. After that trip, I returned back to the inner Earth hangar area through this blue swirling vortex that was just above the water. That's why I've gone in and out of it several times now. One of the groups that I didn't know about until Ari told me about them was a group called the Banished. This is a group that is made up of people that have been kicked out of inner Earth societies over millennia because they didn't want to live by the rules. A lot of them, it turns out, just fell in love with surface humanity. Even though we're going through these wild, crazy times and we're mostly misbehaving, something about us enamored them. And they came out and wanted to live amongst us and help us grow. But at the same time, they have service to self type agendas as well. So they're not seen as positive, more neutral. My first encounter with the Banished, I was actually down at Long Island on our trip last year, family trip. I was laying in the bed, and my son was in the bed next to me, and then there was another queen-size bed in the hotel where my wife and daughter were laying. And I woke up, and I see a woman's head above me, and she's looking this way, and then she looks down and realizes I'm awake, and looks surprised, and then she reaches down and just touches me like that real quick, and then it was over. It was disconcerting to me because my family was in the room. And afterwards, I was having a lot of really weird dreams, thoughts that I don't normally have, very bizarre thoughts and feelings. And as I started to find out more about these people, I started to find out that they tend to seek people in positions of power. They try to intermarry into rich families or powerful families, and that they were having children with these regular human beings. Now, it was probably about 6 weeks. I was having all of these bad dreams, weird thoughts, I just wasn't myself. And I had met with Kari a few times during that time period. Finally, I was pulled down in the middle of the night, white flash teleportation, and she guided me to this room that had a table on it, where she told me that this banished person named Mara had infected me somehow with entity attachments, and that these entity attachments were being used to keep tabs on me and also to get information or intelligence about what was going on with the Anshar. She had me lay down, and she pulls out this real long crystal and starts waving it over me. And it's making noises kind of like how crystal glasses with water in them, you rub your finger around them, they make kind of a singing noise. It was making these different noises, and then all of a sudden I started seeing these shadows darting away. So, they were removed. I was glad they were removed, but I wasn't very happy that they were there to begin with. I asked her why she hadn't removed them in our prior meetings, or at least told me about them. And she stated that they had to wait till they had tried to attach to my energy vortexes, but just before they completely attached, to remove them. The most recent trip, I was taken down where Gonzalez was already waiting for me, and we were brought down to this different hangar. And this is the time when we got in one of these egg-shaped craft, and they just started flying us through the walls and over the city. I got to see that scene that you saw flying over the city and before we flew through another wall. We went up through a blue swirl, came out of the ocean basically in a blue swirl, and darted very quickly and got to where we were going in Antarctica. They didn't slow down. They headed straight for a wall, just like they would do in the inner Earth, in the caverns. We went right through the ice. We ended up in a very similar area I'd been to before, a big giant cavern of ice, where about a football field or two away were a bunch of people steaming the ground, digging, and they didn't notice us. I don't know if we were cloaked or not. So Kari was with us, and two of the real tall Asian-looking inner Earth beings with the head of crystals under their head, under their forehead. And then Gonzalez and I, and they had us put on these real fine mesh, almost like chain of mail suits. We would put them on, put the boots on, and they would just come together, just mesh together like one piece. And then they had us put on this thing that you put your head in through the front. It was kind of like a fencing mask. And it sealed up behind us, and then a screen lit up, and you could see everything going on around you. It was really amazing. We could see all these bodies that were lined up pretty close to the snowbank that were of all different types. There were some of these, what I've described as the pre-Adamite types, with the large skull, 12 to 14 foot tall. And it looked like the bodies had been through something incredible. Some of their arms were stretched out and wrapped around their torsos. They were pretty beat up. And there were different types of humans that were there too. Gonzalez had with him a special core sample kind of tool that we were using to push into these frozen dead bodies to get genetic samples. He was also taking some sort of images as he was taking the sample. One of the ones that I did a sample from was, there was a probably a little bit shorter than 5 foot tall being that was curled up, much like this. And they had a tail that was sticking out, kind of out and frozen. I could see the folds where the tail connects to the back. There were these weird, like, kind of folds of skin. And I had to stick the probe in there and get a genetic sample out for them. But was one of the interesting things is that people in those programs, they were calling this a Pompeii on ice because of the way these bodies were discovered. They were discovered in a very eerie, similar way to Pompeii. These were, the one on the right is one of these original pre-Adamite type beings. And they had the long, elongated skulls, kind of the fatty pockets on their chests, kind of a pot belly as well, and very wide hips, very interesting wide hips. And of course, many of y'all have seen that with the ancient Egyptian depictions of some of the pharaohs. Akhenaten and some of them that were depicted with strange physiology. And some of these elongated skull beings that ended up ruling Egypt and other places were survivors or remnants after the last cataclysm that happened. These, I guess, lack of a better word, these Atlanteans were stranded in little enclaves all over the planet. They no longer had access to their technologies, or most of their technologies, or each other. They were separated and really didn't begin to talk with each other again. There was two different groups. One group was Europe, Africa area, and another group was here in the Americas. And until after the time of Columbus, they were not able to really interact with each other. And there seems that there is a long-standing competition or feud between the two groups, as it is. These images really show, I guess, the strange bodies that they have, the pockets of fat on the belly and the real wide hips and narrow waist. It's striking. Back to the original, the bodies we were looking at. We were then shown that there was a little bit of stonework sticking out of the snowbank we were next to. So, without missing a stride, Kari and the two other Inner Earth people just walked through it as if it wasn't there. And Gonzalez looked at me, I looked at him, and we followed them. And when we got inside, the room was lit, and it was a library. There were all different types of scrolls around, very large, looked like someone with large hands, a large being was using it. And on the wall there was a bowl, and there was a little bit different than this image that was depicted. There was 3 rings with a arrow stuck in the middle of it, almost like a target. The 2 Asian-looking Inner Earth people walked directly up to one of these trays and started loading metal scrolls into this collapsible crate that they had with them. And it was crinkling. It sounded a little bit like tin, but I was able to see one of them that had flopped open a little bit, and it looked like laser-etched symbols, all in it, laser-etched symbols. And to this day, I still don't know what type of intel or information it was, but obviously they wanted to remove it before that area was excavated. So, how is all this information really important to us? Our consciousness is expanding at a huge rate right now. Finding out more information about these Inner Earth groups that have been so tied to us in our journey here on planet over millennia will help us understand our history, but also a lot of the information that we're looking at. Where so much of it has been turned into different belief systems or religions that people will sit there and regurgitate information in a way that they give other belief systems, crap for. We'll give people crap for being so much of a fundamentalist when we're the same way with our belief systems. What will help is if we start to open our minds a little bit to other information and realize that, if we can look at this information with different eyes, we may get even more useful information out of it. Different perspective at looking at it and looking at ourselves. Of course, I have to talk about the graphic novel. Interestingly enough, when I was conversing with Tier Air, stated that all this is really great work. We're planting information to the seeds of consciousness, but they wanted not only me, but all other light workers out there to find a way to not just be preaching to the choir. The people I'm talking to here, you already have a propensity to believe some of this stuff, or believe a version of it. We need to get this information out through our different talents, different ways of art, music, different types of media. And I don't want people to feel like they have to just spread the blue avian message or this information, but I think everyone right now is being pushed to spread this positive information, loving information in a way that will kick in the 100th monkey effect on a larger scale. More and more people they won't know why, they'll want to be more positive. Basically, I was told to do this and get this information to the gaming people, the sci-fi people, that their consciousness is already primed for a lot of this information, but they see it as entertainment purposes only. But if you can get a message into them, why not? So I think that's what we're going to start seeing. A lot of people that do what we do with people with the arts, music. You're going to find people being compelled to spread this blue avian type message of being more loving, forgiving yourself, being service to others and trying to change the world one person at a time.
What is their message?
Their message for humanity is that we need to become more loving, we need to become forgiving of ourselves and forgiving of others. We need to focus on becoming more service to others on a daily basis. And we need to focus on raising our vibration and our consciousness.